This episode of Skirmish Supremacy is brought to you by Reformation Brewery, the official beer of your game night. All right, folks, welcome back to episode 125 of Skirmish Supremacy, and tonight I am joined by a good buddy of mine, co-worker, and all-around general awesome dude, T.S. Lewicard of Cubicle 7. And tonight we are going to be talking about the awesome role-playing game stuff that Cubicle 7 does, because that's really the big focus that they have, on top of probably one of the biggest, most anticipated RPG revamps in the longest damn time, Warhammer Fantasy. T.S., how you doing tonight, man?
I'm really good. How are you two?
Doing great. So, folks, I know I just kind of spilled the beans that yes, TS and I work together during the day. Whatever, fine. We're going to work with that anyway. However, for those of you that don't know about Cubicle 7, TS, why don't you just kind of fill us in about Cubicle 7 and like how it was founded and some of the games that they make?
All right. So Cubicle 7 is a British company, though these days we're feeling more and more international as we hire people from all over the globe. But Cubicle 7 is, once upon a time, was part of the Rebellion group, but now is actually owned by Dominic McDowell. So Cubicle 7 is, in fact, Dominic's company. And in the game industry, if you hear him, people universally call him Dom, but it is Dominic McDowell. And as of right now, I would say Cubicle 7's become most famous for our ability to mirror mechanics to setting. And we do have a couple of very famous IPs, which we do Doctor Who, which is one of the ones that people immediately think of from a long time history of Cubicle 7. And we're very much looking forward to the new Doctor for next year. So she's coming up here very soon. But the next most famous in many ways is The One Ring, which is the dedicated Tolkien RPG that we did that's been award-winning and successful for many years. And relatively recently, in the overall scheme of things, about a year and a half ago, we introduced Adventures in Middle-earth, which is the 5e compatible version of The One Ring. And that has done exceedingly well for us and continues to win the. In fact, we won the Origins Award for Best RPG for the Adventures in Middle-earth Player's Guide this year. So that was a long time sought award on my part. It was one of the last major ones in the gaming industry that I hadn't won. So that was a personal milestone for me. But yes, the big thing, obviously, that a lot of folks are very, very excited about is we are in the midst of releasing Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition. And as big as that is, a number of people are also very, very excited because next year we are to do Age of Sigmar roleplay. So everybody is super stoked with what we have now, and a whole other group is super stoked with what they know is to come. So yes, we've been very busy lately. So.
Right. So you and I have actually chatted quite a bit about this off of the podcast. So this is the first time we're actually recording anything that we've talked about. We probably would, if we were to record every phone conversation we've ever had talking about this, we'd probably have about 30 or 40 episodes at this point.
And a lot of your listeners would be like, okay, you guys, okay, enough.
Yeah, we get it. Shut the hell up. So yeah, both games, obviously, there's a lot of hype behind it. Warhammer Fantasy, it's got a huge pedigree of players that are still going back for quite a ways.
Oh, yeah. 30 years.
Yeah, so the 4th edition, as we're calling it, Wolfrup 4th edition. Well, I am anyway. I don't know about you. But as I've been chatting with people, there's a lot of people that have been very, very curious, if they don't already have the PDF, about what has changed in the game. Like, there's a lot of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I've chatted with a lot of people about that, where they hope that they kept the spirit of the game and like some of the core mechanics, but there is some stuff that they wanted to see cleaned up. So you have done a vast majority of the work on this game as far as like, the writing and checking out mechanics and making sure things work. What are some of the changes that people are going to notice from the 4th edition of the game?
Well, that's a fair question, but I should definitely say this first. I am not the biggest writer. If Andy heard this, he'd be like, what? Andy Law was definitely the main lifter here. And conceptually, it was probably Dom. But after those two, I wrote fairly important chunks, actually, in the overall scheme of things. So that I wrote a couple of the new sub-mechanics that we'll get to that in a bit. I would say the greatest change is from the top down. There's two really fundamental ones. one thing that was broken all the way back to first edition, and even the most diehard grognard that's a first edition fan will admit this, the way the experience system worked, the way that your character would progress was flawed in that you would be hard pressed to honestly try to follow the system and make it all the way through a couple of adventures, much less all the way through the enemy within. Within a couple of careers, you'd just get super wonky characters and things would go off the spout because you'd be like, well, wait a minute, I did this weird long progression of characteristics and I'm now stuck. I can't go any further unless I go back to some ridiculous thing. I'm a judicial champion, and now to get this thing I don't have, I have to go and become a tavern keeper. You know,
Yeah.
it was a really strange. The progression was really odd. Eventually, you'd be forced to do kind of weird things. So that was one thing. Another was over the years, as things have been more and more streamlined, there used to be, like back to the first edition, what by second edition we called skills and talent. So that was really Chris Pramus to kind of split them up. They used to all be kind of kludged together, and as time has gone by, they've been more streamlined. What they do is changed and improved upon. Now, third edition, which you gracefully skipped over, kind of split up and went its own way. Like, obviously, Fantasy Flight Games, anybody listening that knows this stuff knows that Fantasy Flight made a lot of different choices with what they would do with Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay.
Boy, that is a positive way of saying it.
Yeah, that was probably a little diplomatic on my part, but
I think it's my podcast. I'll say whatever the hell I want.
Well, here's the thing is, I think, here's the thing. I know Jay Little is a fantastic designer. And the thing is, a lot of the concepts that they used were really solid, which is why it's now the Star Wars role-playing game.
Yes.
You know,
yes.
The unusual dice and the turning a lot of that stuff into, it was a solid thought. But, you know, the thing is, the fans of Warhammer first and second edition, even though there were a lot of complaints back and forth, folks from second could see where they came from first. Folks that love first could see what their stuff progressed into second. And all of them went, what the hell, when third came along.
Right. Yeah. it was a design choice thing more than anything else. It's not like they said, we're going to rewrite the old world. It's like, no, it's just the mechanically the game worked. For those of you that want to study the nerd history of how Warhammer Fantasy came to be, totally changed.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the big things is, some people really, I guess it's not a hackles roast him, but it's like people want to say, oh, third, there was nothing from third. Third had some awesome writing in it. Third had fantastic stuff, some of which that Andy and Dom and I totally used in the fourth edition. Make no mistake, there was really cool writing and the adventures were great. Unfortunately, the mechanics were not to everybody's taste.
Right.
And it was far enough. I wonder if it had been its own thing from the get-go, if it wouldn't have done better. But as it was, they made a choice, and it was a bold choice. And like that internet meme goes, oh, that's a bold choice, Cotton. Let's see how that works out. You guys have seen that reoccurring. That basically they went a very different direction, and it was not as embraced as it might have been. Now, one thing I could definitely complain about looking back now is I can tell you as a designer of the fourth edition, when I went back to find stuff from the third, even though Workshop helped us with PDFs and whatnot, you cannot get the freaking mechanics of the game because it's on the cards. Like,
yes.
It exists on the cards and the paper and the different things, and they don't have PDFs of those. So as somebody that was going back trying to pick stuff up, it would talk about just frustrating experience. Like, you went back to look for stuff and it was just like, you've got to be kidding, because it was spread out among all these components. So that was incredibly personally frustrating to there was even good ideas in there that were like spread over a wide scatter shot. And Andy did a really good job of culling them for some of the talents. People recognize the names that were coolly named talents in third edition, stuff that was like, oh, that's really cool. That stuff lived into fourth edition. And so did the social levels, because they wrote them brilliantly. They talked about the different tiers of society, and many of those things always existed, but third edition codified it really well. So that stuff remained. Yeah. But mechanics, back to your question that started this whole tirade, one of the things that Andy did is codify 3 different sets of tests, and technically there's a 4th. So now in the new edition, almost everything is unified. You have simple tests, dramatic tests, basically combat, and extended tests, right? And extended is kind of odd. So a simple test is literally kind of what it sounds like. Does it matter? you just roll yes or no. You're literally rolling your classic percentiles and going, will this thing matter? And there's even a flow chart that's like, look, how much is this going to matter? Is it the player just throwing it out? Like, hey, do I see this thing? Do I know this thing? I don't know. Roll. If you have the stat, you look, maybe you do and maybe you don't. If it's not fundamental to the adventure, it's just a simple test.
Right.
If it's dramatically interesting, then it's a dramatic test. And that's when you're actually not only rolling, you're rolling to get levels of success, which is very different than previous Warhammer. And one of the reasons why classically, unfortunately, earlier editions, even better ones like the second edition, there's a lot of whiffing in Warhammer, meaning combats where people would just wave at one another for frustrating numbers of rounds. I miss, he misses, I miss. It's just like a total comedy of errors. They're attacking one another, nobody's hitting. They're just all flailing madly.
Yeah, so, it takes two sword masters and turns them into, like 6-year-olds swinging sticks at each other.
Yeah, exactly. Just because the two of them both keep missing. And more importantly, anybody that was really experienced with that system knows eventually by second, boy, if you had a higher level character with like a parry and a dodge and a couple of attacks, it just became this like ridiculous, like roll. Okay, missed that one. That one misses me. I parry that one. I get out of the way of that one. This is like, it just took forever to even hit somebody. And combat, which should be, in my mind, really frenetic and vicious, which is very Warhammer, it became just this slog of like roll after roll after roll, determining, oh, they missed. Oh, they got out of the way. Oh, I finally managed to hit. Oh, he dodged. Just this on and on and on. We got rid of all that. So you got dramatic tests, which are like, okay, this matters. I'm trying to pick the lock before the guards get to me. Okay, suddenly that matters. So you make a test, and then the better you do, the more success levels you get. Say you've got a 65 to pick locks and you roll a 23. It's really easy math. That's 6 against the 2. You ignore the ones, you just do the 10s. So that's 4 levels of success, which means you're probably doing really well at picking the lock. But also there's a chart with, okay, how far did you do success or failure? So at 0 and 1, it's just like you barely succeeded or you just kind of neutraled out. And then as you go up, you go 1 to 2 is a pretty solid success. 4 or 5 is an impressive success, which means, hey, you did what you wanted to do and then some. So say the lock picker got an impressive success. Maybe they do it so smoothly they leave no traces on the lock that they were there and slip inside without even being noticed. So, in and out. So you kind of get to extrapolate. And that still has a bit of the story stuff that 3 was trying to embrace, like thinking about like, okay, what's the implications of a roll? We think about that a lot, but what that does in combat is every roll matters. It's not just you miss because it's literally an opposed test. So combat is all opposed rolls. So it's never like I miss, I shoot, I miss, he hits, he misses. No, it's always the most direct, like I miss is if you do an ranged attack and the guy gets out of the way. That's like, okay, he got out of the way, I missed. But opposed tests in combat are really interesting because you can both fail. As an example, you could both fail, but you could be the one that failed less. So that's when it's a real comedy of errors in the 4th edition. You both fail, but somebody's going to hit. So you can even actually both fail and somebody crits, which is a riot. So I've actually literally seen that happen in play, and it's hysterical. Like, that's like you both miss, you flip over, you drop your sword, and the sword impales the guy's foot.
Right, yeah.
Which is very Warhammer too. Like, yeah, I got him. So, that is definitely something the new edition has kind of embraced, the old and the new. I think ultimately it remains much of what Warhammer is. It's dangerous. It never ceases to be dangerous. You never have that D&D effect. And I should be clear, I love D&D. I mean, Adventures of Middle-earth is based on the 5th edition, which I think is one of the finest editions of D&D ever. But the fact of the matter is that when you hit a certain level in Dungeons & Dragons, things cannot take you down. They just can't. You hit a level when you've got 100 plus hit points, you can look at a dozen men with crossbows and go, no, these guys can't even kill me. It'll take them several rounds to kill me.
Right. I can actually sit back. I can sit back, drink tea, and let them be I can be a human pincushion for 4 rounds.
Right.
Then I can take them out. And maybe.
Yeah, I could literally slaughter my way through them, and there's nothing they'll be able to do. And the funny thing is, I actually think it's worth some. I hope sometimes somebody embraces that and does a setting that embraces that. Not necessarily kind of like Rich Burlew's The Order of the Stick, where people are vaguely aware of the mechanics of the world. That a higher level of fighters are just like, nope, you can't take me down. At an assessment, they're like, I'm that bad news. You guys can't stop me.
Right.
So somehow embracing that, them being maybe a little aware of the mechanics of the world, that I am way more dangerous than you guys. But here's the thing, in Wolfrup, that never happens. You can become a total badass. A lot of experience down the line, you can be exceedingly bad news. Like what from a Warhammer, the miniatures game we'd think of as like a hero level, lord level character that like lesser mortals, it will take them, many, many, many tries to actually take this guy on.
Yeah, you're talking about throwing 3 regiments of people at one dude, and he's going to blow through them, and maybe they'll get him.
Right, and they might manage to wound him a couple of times, but he'll probably come through it. You actually can have guys like that in 4E, in Wolfrup 4E. But here's the thing. Even the most baddest ass guy like that is leery in combat of only fighting when they must, because somebody can still crit you. Mm-hmm. And for people wondering the mechanics, it's rolling doubles, successfully hitting and rolling doubles can cause crits. And of course, the other reverse is rolling doubles and fumbling, which you can also do.
Yes.
But with under what you needed to attack the guy, you literally crit. So yeah, even when you're dealing with our example is the single goblin, right? You manage to take out a horde of greenskins, there's one goblin left. Nobody goes, just kill it. Like, even when there's one left opponent, people are like, maybe put a crossbow in it. Yeah. Like, engaging in fights that you don't have to is something that Warhammer has always strongly discouraged. And that is totally against the D&D ethos, right? Yeah. D&D literally goes, okay, marshal your resources. You're going to have an average of 3 to 5 fights today.
Yeah.
Right. And that it embraces that. And that's fine. That's the nature of that particular fantasy game. You're going to have a bunch of fights. You're going to do a bunch of stuff. You're going to expend certain resources, and you're going to try to do them the most efficiently so you can take on bigger and bigger threats. Warhammer, Wolfrup's far more be clever about this. Talk somebody else into doing it for you. Ambush them in the dark. Poison them. Right. It openly embraces, do something underhanded to get an advantage, because upstanding fighting is for suckers and Bretonians.
Yeah. If you must, take them out from a rooftop with a heavy crossbow with a spyglass attached to it. So,
yeah, exactly.
And then finish them off in a sword fight.
And it's obviously, are there some characters that are more honorable? Sure. It's a whole range of like, well, maybe they would be a bit more straightforward about it. But yeah, you think long and hard before you get into that stuff. The characters you make and the things you do. It's a game that really embraces that. The adventuring is very much what you do on the side. Adventurers are crazy. Like most of the rest of the old world thinks your characters are insane. You go out and you risk your lives against like horrible dangers for often fairly small amounts of profit when all is said and done. You leave your own life behind, which already you're bucking a system that's very much kind of late Renaissance. So it's very socially stratified. So people are already a little leery about you leaving your job and your career and going off to do this. So they're already like, what is wrong with Aswald? He does weird things, he takes off on the weekends and especially because everybody's so insular and suspicious. They're like, is he in a chaos cult? What's he taking off to do? He's actually taking off to fight chaos cults. But, when the witch hunter shows up, maybe they don't appreciate the distinction.
Right.
I just know you're weird and you creep around with strange people in dark places and I don't like it.
Yeah, exactly. So, and so you mentioned kind of like, the dark comedy that is the Warhammer world. And you guys even embrace that even in the character creation. So you and I have been talking about this. I've been actually rolling up a character for the game. So you guys have actually taken like the old hard fast system of like, you literally roll everything. And you've also built into it like choices where people can, if people want to play like a specific class and build their character a specific way, you give them that choice. However, you also still included that whole like, nope, you roll every stat, you roll your career, you roll your species, everything.
Yeah, and we've given incentives for that, right? If you go random, you get extra XP to start your character. Like, congratulations on embracing the Wolfrup spirit. Here, have some XP. Yeah, here, have free XP. Make stuff. So, I think one of the interesting things is a lot of people have told me, we have a Discord server for Wolfrup. The Discord guys are crazy busy. Andy's on there a lot, and there's like hundreds and hundreds of folks that talk regularly. And it's been funny to see how many of them talk about, I just love making characters in this new edition. I just sit and make characters. And a lot of people said, like, I've like, one guy was saying, I have a notebook of like 50 NPCs because I was having so much fun just making characters. So it certainly, it takes a little bit, but it embraces that. And I think that's always been a Warhammer thing. Like, if you're willing to just take a couple of random rolls, because we're so used to like stratified games where it's like, no, I'm choosing this and I'm choosing that, and I'm being very specific. I think Warhammer is really fun because it can stretch your imagination by going, let me try a couple of random rolls and see what comes up. And then if it's something unusual, maybe embrace it just for fun and end up making characters you never thought you'd play before. There's there's the guy that always plays the ninja. That's the joke, right? There's a dude that always plays a ninja, or the dude that always plays, a lot of people have a type and they always want to play the type. And Warhammer's a really good experience. Wolfrup's really good for like, just once, let's get Jerry to not do his type. See if he'll embrace something. And I've heard great stories of people playing the one character against type that they ever play in RPG was the guy they played in Warhammer. And they're really fond of him too. Like, it was the guy they played in. I love my character from Wolfrup, even though it's nothing like anything else I've ever made before. Well, are you going to do that in other systems? No, that's a Wolfrup thing. I'm just going to do it for Wolfrup, But, it is what it is. So.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, I don't mind talking about my character a little bit that I've been rolling up. So I went the full on, I'm going to roll everything. Like, I was like, I'm going to let the dice decide my fate. And so folks, the other thing to keep in mind too, if you're not familiar with the Warhammer setting, first off, like, elves and dwarves are not like just common. Like, you don't walk into a town and just see a bunch of elves and dwarves hanging out in a bar with humans, right? So it's very.
So sorry, not to cut you off, Tim. That's certainly true of the Empire, right?
Yes.
I mean, presumably one day, just real fast for fans, if we do an Ulthuan source book, obviously it would be almost exactly the reverse of what's in there. Like, it would be 97% chance that you meet an elf, 1 or 2% chance you meet a human only in like Safari and a couple of merchant places. And you don't meet a dwarf ever. Probably not a halfling ever.
Right. So in again, a lot of it comes down to just like how the Warhammer setting was, where,
totally.
You're like in Wolfrup, you are, for the most part, you're going to be a Reiklander.
Yeah.
So,
totally.
like, you have, what is it, a 3% chance to not be human?
It's
or
a little
4% chance?
It's a little bit greater than that, because in the Reichland, there's a decent chance of being a dwarf or a halfling. But it is like on the 100 percentile, I think it's literally 90% chance, if you embrace the random, that you're a human.
Yes.
3 or 4% chance you're a dwarf. 3 or 4% chance you're a halfling, and then literally a 1% chance you're a high elf, or a 1% chance you're a wood elf.
Yes. So yeah, that's the first thing. So you embrace that, and then you actually roll for your career in class, which all kind of wraps up into one roll.
Yeah.
So
totally.
for example, like my character, I ended up rolling a human, and I rolled an 88, which comes up as, career as a rogue, but my class, or there's a class and career class.
Yeah, you got it. Your class was a rogue. Your career was specifically witch.
Yes. So I ended up as a witch, which, if anybody's familiar with Warhammer, it's like, if I get caught, I am dead.
So there would be a whole other career called witch hunter. So you all can extrapolate.
Yeah. So if I end up in a party with a witch hunter, I need to keep my shit on
on the low down. Yeah, for sure.
So, but, also embracing the roles. Like, I was joking with TS a little bit over text over the course of the weekend, where it's like, I literally, in my own way, rolled up one of my favorite characters of all time, Elric of Melnibonia. So, my weapon skill. So, like, you start off, you roll 2d10 and you add 20 for everything, if you're a human.
If you're going the random route.
Yeah, if you go on the random route, you literally, and it goes right down the chart. So it's weapon skill, ballistic skill, strength. Like, you roll each one individually. It's not like you roll 10 different stats and then you assign them where you want. No, you go straight down the chart. So my character, just based upon rolls on stats and talents, and because I even went straight random on the talents that I could get. So I ended up as like a warrior born with a weapon skill starting off at 40. So, like, I have, from a starting character's perspective, the highest weapon skill you could possibly get.
Yep.
So I am like this like naturally born melee fighter who also happens to be a witch.
Right. Now tell them your toughness.
So so my strength, on the other hand, I rolled a 6. So I have one of the lowest strengths in the game. I'm a 26 strength. And then my toughness is actually pretty decent. It's a 34.
Okay, that is better.
So but my strength, it's like, so yeah, I mean, as far as like my weapon fighting, I'm phenomenal as long as it's not a pole arm, pole axe, or anything heavy.
So very much that's why our joke, a touch of the albino emperor, the last emperor of Melnibone.
Yeah, so if for some reason I end up with a sword in game that becomes sentient and gives me strength as I keep killing things, then it's clearly a cornblade and I'm just going to be killed. But the point of it is that, so yeah, my character is a witch, so I do have, just from the build, some innate casting ability. But because, like, again, low gritty level, the first few games I play are more than likely going to be, I'm going to avoid combat, but when I need to, I'm just going to gank people with the dagger because I can do that really well.
Yeah, totally.
So, so again, like just straight random rolls, I ended up creating a character that typically when I first start playing in RPGs, I don't start with spellcasters just because it's like, that's like a whole other section of the book I have to read. You know, and it's not that I'm a lazy player. It's just, you know, I kind of want to see the mechanics of the game before I get into the spell casting, just so that way when I get to spell casting, I've already got the groove, and I'm just like, okay, like I've played the fighter, and I'm going to.
Yeah, I certainly don't think you're too far out that. I think we'd actually have to do I was actually, speaking of D&D, Mike Merles and I were talking about that one time. And I know Jeremy Crawford's talked about it too, but literally, like, if you look at the most common thing from D&D, it is literally a human fighter.
Yeah.
Like, people play what they know. Like, human fighter is one of the most common classes ever. I think it's by, like, human rogue thief. And all the other weird, interesting ones we think of, like, no, a lot of people are like, I want to be a fighter. You know, they start the very straightforward, like, I'll be a fighter, maybe a rogue. And then the other ones, you know, obviously everyone has its own sun thing. Because Wolfrup kind of embraces the random, it's a little bit harder to go, well, everybody plays this. People think about, like, the iconic characters from Wolfrup, like, well, these iconic, obviously, like the rat catcher is somewhat iconic. You know, people are always talking about the rat catcher and the small but vicious dog. And there's certain things that you think of, like, okay, that is distinctly Warhammer. Yeah. But most of the time, it has a lot less of that, like, well, everybody plays this. You know, other than a couple of the famous ones, it's a whole range of, like, I've never heard of any one specific thing other than the aforementioned, everybody always jokes about the time I was a rat catcher. It's like, there's a lot of things that at one point, this is some time ago, you and I talked about this, but for your listeners, it's interesting that if you think about stuff that is distinctly only iconically Warhammer, and I'm not talking about soldiers or guards or all those things that appear in other RPGs, but you think of a thing that if I was to show you the character and say, this character, this career, without hesitation, you go, oh, that's from Warhammer. Right? The things that are really distinct. There's not as many as you might think. How other things are interpreted are very Warhammer. Yes. Right? But the actual ones that everybody unquestionably, without a second thought, goes Warhammer, it's like, well, the most classic being Slayer, right? Yeah. Troll Slayer is uniquely Warhammer. For those of you that don't know, all two of you, Slayers are unique to Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay in that dwarves are not just short, stumpy, wide humans. They have an entirely different ethos and way of thinking in the old world that's very different than humans. And correspondingly to a dwarf, their honor literally does mean more than their life. And if they lose it or suffer a grief that they cannot bear, they literally shave the sides of their heads, spike their hair into a massive mohawk, which they grease with animal fat and dye the brightest orange they can manage, and basically go out to seek their death by ritual suicide in combat.
Right.
Thing is, they have to die fighting the foes of their enemies, and they can't die stupidly. It's not like get ready to take the Oath of Grimnir and then go run into the street and die in traffic. Right. They literally have to find the doom worthy of what they've done so that they can reclaim their honor in their own eyes and the eyes of their ancestors. So they basically have to die by their own exacting standards.
Yes.
They have to, be fighting for something worthwhile.
Yeah, you don't play a Slayer and then throw yourself in front of a bunch of stampeding horses.
Yeah, exactly. Very distinctly Warhammer, and really interesting. That was really fun to write. I actually wrote the Slayer for this edition. and Workshop signed off on all the stuff that I'd said, which is really cool because Slayer's unique. It's basically you as the player don't always want your character to die, but your character wants to die. And in the advice of the Slayer just says that, embrace it, die well, find a mighty doom, die in such a spectacular manner that your friends remember it for years after, die well.
Exactly. So yeah, it's the little stuff like that, that definitely adds a flavor. But that's one of the things that like I've really noticed with the game is that for a lot of folks that are kind of used to, more of the narrative games where there's not a lot of the stats and there's not a lot of crunch. Like you and I have had talks about like, is crunch necessary in games? Yes and no. And Warhammer definitely has like, I call it moderate level crunch where you really got to like read the book and like see all the little stuff that your characters get. Like, for example, like we were talking today about the witch where it's like, you said, it's like, oh yeah, every time like your distinct thing is that every time you hit people, like they start like they take a bleeding condition. I'm like, really? As I read it, like, oh yes, they do. So, so it's this little stuff like that where it's like it's those little bits of things that like after a while, yes, it all starts making sense and it starts stacking up. So the first few times you might make characters for Wolfrup, it might take you a little bit of time just because of the fact that you're like, oh, shit, I'm flipping through the book, and just like any other first time that you start with a new RPG, right? You're always going to have that.
Well, and right now it's even more tricky because obviously we're in the PDF. I mean, when people have a print book in front of them, it's a lot easier to have your little posties at the chapters where you're like, the ones you're rapidly flipping back and forth from. You're like, I mean, the big thing that a lot of people, there are a lot of talents, and that is a massive understatement. There are a lot of talents. Talents are actually one of the cool things that different careers get very uniquely. Some of the talents, like only one or two other careers ever get. Certain talents, you only get them at certain tiers, and only a very finite number of careers get them. So you might never read them unless you're just flipping through the talent section. So yeah, there's certainly a lot of, when it's time to make choices, you're early on front loaded with a lot of choices. Like, do you want this skill or that skill? Do you want these set of talents? Do you want these? So there's a lot of choices when you're first making the character. But once you've got it underway, while you still have a lot of choices, you're only doing them one at a time. Then it becomes, once you've made the character, it's a lot more incremental. So lest anybody think you'll be overwhelmed by the mid-tier crunch, you have a lot of time to adjust to everything after you've made the character. It's like, and I assume once the arc of people are familiar with the book and they've made characters for a while, it'll be a lot less of an issue. It's just right now we're all like flipping around in a PDF and going, wow, what's this do? And flipping back and forth. And even I do that to a certain extent. I don't know all the talents off the top of my head. There's a lot of them. There's like 100 plus. It's just like, I don't know them all. I guess that's worth telling everybody. There are 256 careers in our 256 tiers. There are 8 classes, each of which has 8 careers, and all 8 careers, every career has 4 tiers. That's 256 different career/tiers. So that's a lot, and there's a lot of different individuals. Sure, there's stuff that they're shared between a couple of different ones, but there's a lot of different abilities that only certain folks ever get. A lot of different stuff to grasp when you're reading up on Warhammer. So certainly it's one of the things people read it and they just go, holy crap. Like people that haven't played Wolfrup before read through it and just go like, whoa, there's a lot here.
Yes, there's a lot of different things to embrace.
Yeah, totally.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the other stuff, because we've talked a lot about the character creation and the process behind that. Obviously, we don't have to go into too much detail on the Warhammer world itself, because there's a lot of people out there that know of the classic Warhammer setting
before it got blowed up.
So obviously, like mechanically, like the RPG might be something new for them. So, we talked about the feel, how like it's dark and it's gritty, and like 6 street urchins with daggers could take down like the greatest warrior of all time because they caught him sleeping and he's only got like 11 wounds. So where like small stuff like that, where again, like the combat's meant to be dark and vicious, and like combat should end soon. What kind of things can we expect from like the game master standpoint? Like what kind of things have been put into the game to like help game masters maybe for the first time, if they're coming from say D&D, get into Warhammer, that will help kind of guide them in that way?
Well, part of that is there's a lot of, unfortunately, just for space considerations, the section of the GM's guide in the core book is smaller than we would have liked in the overall scheme of things. But the good news is some of the advice that would have been there has kind of blended its way into the starter kit. So folks that are kind of looking to like, well, how would I run this? The starter kit adventure is very much like, here's some really cool pre-gens. Here's a very Warhammer old world introduction situation. And this is kind of how it runs. This is, you get to see like how this runs. So as time goes by, I mean, Graham Davis has done just an amazing job, like doing the director's cut of the Enemy Within campaign. There is tons of advice. Like, not only there's the core books with advice, there's sub books with further advice. Like, you could do this, you could do that. Like, tons of suggestions and different stuff that you'll be able to throw at things. And then we have a lot of plans for PDF support. That the whole team, we're going to be working on different PDFs and whatnot that will release incrementally over time, instead of it being you like always having to wait for the next big release. Instead of you guys always being in a position where like, well, I need the next book or I need the next thing. It's like, actually, they're going to release a PDF, each week or every other week. Sometimes it depends, but there'll be periods where we're releasing PDFs on different subjects that people are like, oh yes, I want to know about that. Well, good news. We'll release a PDF about it. Then eventually those will be, the better ones will be collated into a book at some point. But the idea is that we'll get the stuff out as we have it, instead of it always being like, well, you got to wait till it's all done for the book. So that should certainly help some of that, because I know Andy's very keen on advice for new GMs. And one of the ones that I've flat out been asked about before, and it is a tricky subject, is like, how do you make a group in Wolfram? How do you make a party with so disparate characters? Like, what do you do if we all randomly roll and it's like an elf lawyer and a dwarf bounty hunter and they're all a group? Like, how did these guys ever become a group? So it's stuff like that. Like, well, that is definitely a place where advice is probably needed. Because, people that know Warhammer really well can come up with something, but for new GMs, we are thinking about it. It's not something that we're just like, we're going to throw you guys in the sharks and let you figure it out. It's stuff we want to address. I'd say a big thing that is already in the midst. I can tell you this because Andy's already been talking about it. So, but if y'all haven't heard, the number one thing that I've heard of people that are like, there aren't really any magic items in the book at all. And it's funny how few people have observed that, in the sense that you'd think as a fantasy game, somebody would immediately go, hey, there's no magic items. But actually, there's so much in that book. It's pretty funny. It takes somebody reading it a while before they go, wow, that's really cool. Hey, there aren't any magic items. But, you read this huge book first before you finally realize, well, that's the funny thing. In Warhammer, magic is relatively rare. And the first edition, and this is Grognard's hate to hear this, but it's true. The first edition magic items are so D&D derived. It's really obvious. Really obvious. And some of them come from the war game too. Like, obviously, some of them read like war game stuff. But you see the magic items and you go like, okay, these were like, there's a potion of invisibility. And there's just a lot of stuff that like strikes you as very D&D. And one of the things that we were on about is like, we wanted to have it all together so that when we hit magic items, they felt very Warhammery. So stuff from the different generations of Warhammer that were like, no, this sounds, I remember these names. These are like stuff that used to be in the army lists, like cool stuff, And that's the thing is, I don't think Andy and I have really at all thought that there should be weak magic items lying around. I mean, there will be some that are, basically Warhammer is not really a world that embraces the +1 sword. Like, if anybody's bothering to make a magic item, it's a thing of power.
Yeah.
Like, if there's something that somebody has put magic into, it's bad news. The winds of magic have been wrapped physically into this thing. It's not a normal thing. So Andy actually has a big PDF release that's going to happen sooner rather than later, after the first couple of releases. That's going to be magic items. Like, there'll be a big thing pretty early on, so that folks that are like, what about magic items? Like, that's one of the first ones on the docket.
Right. So that'll definitely, I know, to tie together like the D&D folks, I'm sure that will help in a lot of ways. But but you did actually mention a massive difference from, again, from we sound like we're crapping on D&D. We're not. It's just it's the game that so many people out there recognize from like a fantasy setting that like it's the best comparison we have. Where with D&D you very much have like that whole idea. Okay, I'm 5th level. Everybody in the party should now at least have a +1 magic weapon.
Yeah, totally. Whereas it's very, very much, you're totally right, Tim, where it's very much the reality that you could have a group that never sees a magic item in their entire adventuring career. Or if they do, you're right, like as opposed to D&D where it's inconceivable by 10th level that all the players don't have at least an item or two, and probably a thing of power by that level. Right? 1 or 2 like really powerful things. In Warhammer, you could very much have a group of guys that once they've got a couple of careers on their belt, 1 or 2 of them have never had a magic item. Maybe the fighter actually has a really cool dwarven rune blade. So he's got a blade with a couple of dwarf runes on it, and everybody's like, that sword's badass, right? That's it in the party. Like that guy's got that sword. Nobody else has anything. Yeah, exactly. It's like that. Well, and also my kind of thing, the Warhammer thing about that is, that is a really good Warhammer example. So the guy's got the blade. It's got some dwarven runes on it, right? In D&D, the presumption is like, oh, the dude's got a magic sword. Neat. And that's like usually how most games roll. And I'm not saying mine are any different, but in a lot of games, that's how it rolls. Hey, he's got a magic. In Warhammer, man, you're walking on the street and the dwarves come rolling up to you and go, why do you have that? Who are you? What the hell?
Right.
And you are literally challenged in the street that you've got this blade with dwarven runes on it. So literally you could get into trouble. They bring you aside. You have this whole thing like justifying who you are, where you got the blade. And literally when the dwarves embrace you have the blade because you did some heroic thing for the dwarves, because you did something awesome for one of the cracks, right? They literally go like, okay, you get to bear that. When you die, that comes back to the crack. Just so we're clear, right? So they're literally like, there's no presumption you're keeping it or your buddies are going to sell it if you die. No, they expect it back.
Right.
Like you're not just going to carry this blade forever. Like the dwarves are like, no, when you're done, it comes back to us.
Yeah. Well, like you and I talked about too, kind of going into that dark, gritty part of the world too. Like you get done kind of doing your typical, I'm using heavy quotations for the folks that, are listening, adventuring, and you find this sword that like everybody in the party suspects is magical. Like, it's with where you found it and everything else. You're like, this thing is too clean and too perfect. And like, this is definitely magical. You don't know what it does yet, but it's magical. And so you end up like going back into the town after your quest, and like the local regent looks at you and goes, oh, that sword would be a perfect gift for my lord.
Yeah, exactly. That is magnificent, boys. Thank you for all that you've done. Ladies, we are beyond impressed. Baron von Sapanatheim is so pleased with your contributions to his cause. Thank you. He'd take the blade away from you. like, what? Yep, and it's just, that's the way it is. They're nobles and you're not. Guess what? Blade's gone. Right. Unless you are such a badass yourself that they're like, maybe it is wiser to leave it with that person, for whatever reason. But even then, it's a world where they keep track of stuff like that, right? It's not glossed over like, those guys. And Warhammer embraces that stuff. It says, make that part of your adventures from a GM perspective. Just that the world doesn't just let it slide when you're carrying around items of power. And and this is very much worth noting, there are a lot of religious folks, including potentially some of your fellow PCs, whose religious beliefs are such that they don't believe in carrying magic items because magic items are influenced by chaos.
Right.
Now, there's big arguments to go, no, wait a minute. There's a big difference between a clearly chaos item and something that's influenced by the winds of magic and was done by, formal magisters or elves or whatnot. And certainly the dwarves would take serious umbrage because their runes they'd tell you right straight up, are not chaos. They're, in fact, the antithesis thereof. They are runes that pull from the winds of the world and, channel it in a safe way. So the dwarves would be very offended by, that's a thing of chaos. They'd be like, oh, it's on. And actually, honestly, witch hunters do not often make that accusation because many of them are faithful to Sigmar, and Sigmar always swore by the dwarves. I mean, let's face the dirty secret. Sigmar's Warhammer, the name of the game, Gal Maraz, the Skull Splitter, that would be a magic item. That would be a dwarven rune weapon. So,
Right, exactly. So it's stuff like that where it's like, again, that adds flavor to the game and like really embraces the Warhammer world. Now, like one of the things you and I also talked about too, and I guess we can kind of use this to segue into Age of Sigmar a little bit. I don't want to do that too much, but just because the flavors of the two, right, is like the monsters. We've talked about this numerous times, like via phone call and like just conversations that we've had where it's like, okay, so let's talk about like, take a typical corn demon like bloodletters, right? Like big horn dudes with blood blades. You know,
totally.
where so in Warhammer Fantasy, 3 of those come through a portal, and your party looks at each other and goes, "Okay, we got to save this town. 2 of us are going to die.
Yeah,
the other 2 are barely going to make it out of this. We're probably going to retire after this. So I guess let's make this count."
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and you're making rolls in this edition. You're also immediately like, oh, that's 3, blood pouring demons holding bloods. Yeah, we're all making moderate corruption checks right now just for being in their presence. So you're picking up chaos, corruption points just for being exposed to that powerful of a creature. You're like, okay. So right off the bat. So yeah, exactly. And where Tim is going with this is, in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, you face that thing and you go, okay, this could be our end. In Age of Sigmar, that's like a moment's fight.
Yeah.
Like, oh, look, well, those things. Now, when a bloodthirster shows up, the party all looks at each other, cracks their knuckles, and says, can we do this? And they seriously consider whether or not they can do it. And yeah, maybe we can take him, right? Whereas in, Wolfrup, that thought is so far from their minds. They've already passed the outer bands of the town and they're running at high speed because it doesn't even occur to them to take on such a thing.
Well, that, and at that point, their lunch is probably passed through their bowels too.
Yeah, well, I think what's a really good example, it's literally, I mean, it's subtle or blatant as you want. It's flat out in the book. One of my favorite pictures near the rear of the book is there's a great unclean one. That would be, for the few of you that don't know, that would be a greater demon of Nurgle. And it's sitting there laughing maniacally in a street. And you can see everybody's running. Like, basically the street, everyone, including 1 or 2 of the iconic characters, running. The only one that's not running is the Slayer.
Right.
Everybody else is running away in a blast radius. And the Slayer's hefting his axe and going, my doom is upon me. When everybody else is just running like hell.
Right, because remember, the Slayer's not a hero. He's just crazy. So,
yeah, exactly.
So yeah, that's I know going to be one of the, for flavor for the game, that's going to be the two. That's probably going to be the greatest dichotomy between the 2 games when they both come out. If you compare them side by side, is that Wolfrup, for those of us that are older Warhammer Fantasy, either like war gamers or even the role players, like we remember the world being like that dark kind of gothic grittiness. Where it's like, the idea of being a rat catcher, it's like, well, that's how I grew up and made money until like I decided I'm going to go stab Skaven in a sewer. So, so it's stuff like that where it's like, okay, so it definitely has that like down to earth gritty feel where then you take it over to the Age of Sigmar side. And for those, I know there's people out there that don't care for Age of Sigmar as far as style wise and things like that, because a lot of people looked at it and said, well, this isn't Warhammer anymore. And in a way, I get what they mean by that. What they mean is that, like, it's not the old gothic gritty. It is now more of that, like, super high end. I call it almost like comic book fantasy.
Oh, sure.
And that's probably the biggest, like, change between the 2 games. Obviously there's gonna be some mechanic things too. But like the idea of like, going against those 3 bloodletters and like, the Sigmarite warrior is going to look at it and go, okay, you guys go on. I'll be there in just a few seconds.
Yeah. Well, it's the thing, like in the old world, you're specifically dealing in a situation where like many people deny the existence of the ruinous powers or would want to. They say chaos. Chaos was defeated by Magnus the Pious 2 centuries ago in the Great War against Chaos.
Right.
We don't. Hence, that's why the famous campaign is called The Enemy Within, because people are like, nah, there's not really a problem, or a lot of people are in denial, and those that aren't are like, well, sure, there's chaos stuff, but they're up in the north, right? We got them held at bay. So people are very specific about like, yeah, there's some creepy mutants around, and there's some other stuff, but we got it under control, right?
Right.
Understanding the realm spheres. I mean, basically, chaos had won up until like a century, 60, 70, a century ago, Chaos flat out won. All that was, Chaos had won, except for the realm of Aesir, except for heaven itself. Every other realm had fallen. And until the coming of the Stormcast Eternals, everything had fallen. So suddenly everything changed. So you are dealing with folks that Chaos isn't this weird threat on the horizon or doesn't exist. Nobody in their right mind in all of Age of Sigmar ever would argue Chaos doesn't exist.
Right.
Not for a heartbeat. They are fighting Chaos all the time. They're like, right. Chaos is right over that ridge. Like nobody is like, oh, it doesn't exist. It's like right there.
It is literally my neighbor.
Yeah, exactly. They're like, and also just the way people perceive those things in that, in the realm spheres is completely different. They're like, yeah, you got to watch out for the machinations of Tzeentch, or the damn blood god, and they're chanting blood for the blood god. They just have a very different take on it. They're like, we fight those bastards. That's something we've stood against for, ages untold. So it's just a very different scale. Yeah. And obviously, we can't talk about it too much other than to say, like, it's definitely a high heroic fantasy game. Like, right. Age of Sigmar is way more a touch of the mythic and high, legendary heroics right from the get-go. Like, even starter characters in that one. I mean, I don't want to say anything too definitive other than to tell you all that, people will be pretty heroic from the jump in Age of Sigmar. You should be really bad news from day one in Age of Sigmar, because that's really what that world that calls for. That property is this huge over the top mythic thing. And I know, and it's, I'd say to many people, it's cool if you're like, look, man, Warhammer's my jam. I don't really want to do Age of Sigmar. I get that. But what I tell people is, look, I've worked on, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay for a long time. Believe me, I'm a big Warhammer fan. I have a lot of credits and books to prove it. And I'm still super excited about Age of Sigmar. I think it's going to be cool. And you guys that are like, well, I don't know, or I didn't really like Age of Sigmar and blah, blah, blah. I think you should at least check out the RPG. Even if you're dead set against buying any of the miniatures or playing the game, I think you'll want to check out what Cubicle 7 does, because I think you guys will be, in spite of yourselves, maybe like, this is kind of cool.
Yeah, exactly. So right now, when should we be seeing the first book? Because I know that you guys are doing a special edition book, a standard edition book, and then you have the starter set for Warhammer.
So the good news for anybody that already has the pre-order is like, oh yes, it is literally at print. We were serious when we said, hey, it went to print like literally 2 days after we closed the PDF with all the help we got from all over. Thanks, by the way, if you're one of the people that sent help. We basically did as much editing as we could, because at some point you just have to pull the trigger. And we caught a lot of it. But there's still stuff Andy's got in the fact for things that slipped through or went missed. And those drive everybody crazy. We had one sheet of corrections of like literally like 100 plus minor corrections that didn't get processed. So we can still see all those errors in the final. And it drives everybody that did it crazy, because it's just like, it's like, oh, we found these, these shouldn't have been fixed. So anyway, it's at print, and that should be, knock on wood here, be shipping at the very tail end of this month. So it does ship in September, as we hoped. Now, quite frankly, it's a global audience. There are people literally all over the world that are pre-ordered, and there's a lot of different swaths to this particular pre-order. There's a big group that goes to England. There's a big group that goes to Ireland, where we have a big warehouse now. We have some other stuff going directly into the distribution channels because they have so many pre-orders, and that's actually fairly rare. We usually have to like collate all the stuff and then send it out. But there's stuff in the European market that like they want it immediately. They're like, please just send it straight to us. So we're making arrangements that we don't normally have for various distribution centers where it's being sent direct to go out. So I think, TS says very cautiously, the greater bulk of you will all be able to have it if you pre-ordered in October. A few folks, just because of how distribution works, which Tim knows all too well, there's kind of a chaining of like, it has to get to one set of hands to move to another set of hands. Yeah. So it is possible that it won't see stores until November, just because of how the distribution lines work. Like, it has to get to a couple of places. So in some places it'll see stores in later October. Some places you won't see it till November. That's just reality.
It's a safe bet to say it's probably going to be, if we're going to lump it into one, like a Halloween launch.
Yeah, totally. That's literally what it'll look like. Now, the upside is The starter kit is so very close to done. The primary writing on the starter kit is actually completely done. What we're actually now at is art, a last editing pass, and a couple of other things. So the starter kit is really, really looking good. And always, you got to be careful before you say, but in a chat today, Andy was just telling people, I agree, the starter kit's one of the best things we've written. Like, as good as the chorus, the starter kit's amazing. I think people are really going to dig it. The Uber's Right guide is something else. It is so chock full of hooks. It's insane reading it. Like, you read it, it's just like hook after hook after hook after hook. Like, every single entry has all kinds of cool stuff and then a couple of hooks. So I think GMs will get a massive utility out of that. Even folks that have the core book will be like, man, you have to pick up the starter kit just because there's so much stuff in it. It's really cool. That, knock on wood, the PDF should drop in another, I want to say a week and a half. We're being really cautious now because we were already late with the core and everybody gives us the dagger eyes when we're late. So I think if all goes well, it will drop in a week and a half. It goes immediately to print as well. And its arc goes, late-ish October for that one shipping. So once again, into November, which means stores will probably see it in December in advance of Christmas, if you guys were hoping. So it literally should see hands in late-ish November into December. So yes, those two things should be out in 2018, which should make everybody happy. The collector's edition, which is a very specific thing since it's sold out. If you didn't already get it, you're unlikely to be waiting for it because it's sold out. The collector's
you're about
edition,
to get raked through the coals on eBay. Yeah,
exactly. Oh, I don't even want to. I will, from a morbid sense, be looking on eBay to see how high it gets, but I assume it will hit stupid levels, right? But the collector's edition, that follows it, since it's got a few more bells and whistles. I think it's supposed to be 2.5 weeks behind the core. So if you get your core, you can assume that the collector's edition is following on its heels not too much later. And in part of that, too, is just the sheer logistics. Yes, it would have been better in some cases if we had the core book. For the folks that got the bundle from us that were getting a copy of the core book and the collectors and the starter kit, it would be great if we could ship them all at once. But the reality is they're going to be shipped separate because otherwise you're going to be sitting waiting forever. So you'll get your core a little bit later. If you got the collectors, you'll get the collectors. Or if you just got the collectors, you'll get yours after. And then eventually the starter boxes will show up. So for most folks that have got the bundle, you'll just get it 1, 2, 3. So, and then after that, if you guys have checked out your PDF, you've already seen the next release in the docket. That is a classic set of adventures. Some of them have been updated by the one and only Graham Davis, who is really, really awesome. Not only did he do, obviously, the Enemy Within that he's revamping for us, which is going to be really sweet, but he also did Rough Nights and Hard Days, which collects a couple of old classic adventures. One that a lot of people remember, if you're an old school fan, was that Rough Night at Three Feathers, hence the name of Rough Night and Hard Days. Rough Night at Three Feathers is a hysterically funny adventure. It's really funny. It's kind of a comedy of errors in a tavern, basically. In a Warfrup kind of way. So a comedy of black errors, the wrong people getting killed and things going horribly wrong. So that one follows, and we didn't want to give a definitive date, but it follows on the heels of the starter kit not too long after. Cool. So in the overall scheme of things, just long enough for the channel I'm not certain if it'll see 2018. It might see first quarter 2019, like early on.
Okay.
And then we have more announcements I think we're supposed to make in a couple of weeks. And we are definitely, before the year is out, you guys will hear from Dom and a big blowout of like, okay, guys, here's the plans for next year for Wolfrup. So there'll be a lot of the titles listed and in the order we expect them to come out. Not necessarily the exact dates of when we expect them to come out, but certainly the order that we're anticipating doing things. And along with some more stuff that I was mentioning about the PDFs, you guys will hear a lot more like, yeah, this stuff is coming. It's going to be awesome. So that's the plan.
Nice. Awesome. So obviously I know this, but for the folks out there, like, yes, Warhammer Fantasy is not going to be just like we release the book and you never see it again. Or like, it's this one thing and done. No, like, Cubicle 7's going out of their way to really like push this and let people like see the glory of what was the old world.
Yeah, for sure. I
think that it's all blowed up.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's fair to say that there will be what most folks would consider a robust release schedule plan for at least 2 years out. And that's just from the stuff that I already know is in the pipeline, plus some additional stuff. And when I say 2 years out, I mean 2019 and 2020 are already spoken for. I don't know if we'll be telling you guys about 2020 for a while, but I know that there are products planned for quite a while already. So
yeah, hands are full.
Yeah, exactly. And that's just Wolfrop. That's not even boy, as a company, Cubicle 7, we got a lot of stuff we're going to tell people about the One Ring and Adventures in Middle-earth later in the year, a bunch of big announcements for that. And that's not even, we haven't even touched Age of Sigmar. So, yeah, there's a lot of stuff coming from us as everybody keeps joking under things like, my God, you're determined to have all of our wallet, all of our wallets and all of our money. Yes, that is the plan.
First world problems, folks.
Yeah, exactly.
So TS, if people want to know more about Cubicle 7 and the games that are launched and everything, where can they find Cubicle 7 right now between the internet, Facebook, Twitter, all that good stuff?
Well, the immediate answer, and let me say before people laugh hysterically, Cubicle 7, basically, our website is definitely one of the ones you go to. But the thing is, we are working on improving the website. So when people are like, well, wait a minute, okay, I go to the website sometimes and there's only so much there. I will tell you guys right now, it's cubicle7.co.uk is actually and that's what throws everybody up. It's .co.uk. So that is our basic, if you didn't know where to find us, that's the easy find. But after that, what we really want to do is update a lot of our communication channels in the next couple of months. In fact, we want our website, eventually it really needs an update, but we also want to have a little postie there that's I don't know what you call a web board where we're regularly putting updates and stuff so that people are less having to call us from different folks. Also, we have a Facebook. So Cubicle 7 is on Facebook. You can find us there. And we have Twitter. We have a social media where we announce stuff on Twitter. So, and once again, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's Cubicle 7 on Twitter. So we didn't go for we didn't go for super original. It's just just plug in Cubicle 7. You'll find it. It's
awesome, man. Well, TS, I definitely want to thank you for coming on the podcast and talking about, Warhammer. I know you and I have talked about it for hours upon hours upon hours on end.
Yes.
Outside of the podcast, I just finally decided, hey, let's put two and two together and get you on. But, with the game coming out now and everybody's having the hype, it's definitely people need to be ready for this one. It's going to be a big RPG. If you're still a fantasy fan, you want to get into something that's not D&D. And again, we're not crapping on D&D. It's just, you got to look at what it is. It's Warhammer Fantasy brought back in all of its glory. Got to jump on board.
Right. And it's really that thing where people are so often well, I can't find people because it's not D&D or Pathfinder. So for some games, I have the feeling you're going to readily find people to play this with you. It's got a large and ancient following, and a lot of folks will sing its praises that haven't played, which will make even new guys I've heard of Warhammer, I'd like to try. I think you'll find it will be very easy to find players for this one. When you're normally nobody will play if it's not 5e, I bet you'll get people.
Yeah.
Just to try out something new. So.
Awesome, Manfred. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, it was really fun. Cool. I will sign off, I guess.
Yeah. All right, folks, that's going to wrap up this episode of Skirmish Supremacy. We will see you next time. Thanks for listening to another episode of Skirmish Supremacy. To see more of the antics that Nick and I do, you can check us out on Facebook at Skirmish Supremacy. We also have Twitter, which we can be reached at Skirmish Supreme, because apparently Skirmish Supremacy does not fit in Twitter. And if you want to email us directly, you can reach us at tim@skirmishsupremacy.com or nick@skirmishsupremacy.com. Thanks for listening.